Hello, viewers all around the world. Happy New Western Year to all of you. And thank you for joining us in this first webcast of 2020. My name is John Metzelaar. I am the leader of the Innovation and Digital Transformation Institute for the Conference Board, together with Rita Shore, my partner in the US. And I'm going to go and be your host in this session. We're going to go and look at something which we typically don't look at very often. When it comes to innovation, we typically spend a lot of time about design thinking, about agile, about scrums, but we're not often going into the human side of innovation, and that's what we're going to do today. Specifically, we're going to zero in on a concept which we call serial innovators. Who are they? What makes them stand out? How do you manage them, and how do you get more of them? And we all know how important this is in a world where we're all looking for the breakthrough innovation to push our business and our companies forward in this so volatile world. Before I introduce the speakers for today, I would like us to go and get to some housekeeping rules, not because I want to be too rigid, but just to maximize your experience. Questions, we really want your questions. We want to make this as engaging as we can. Bottom left is the space where you can feed them in. And I will then feed them into the conversation when I see a next opportune moment. So don't immediately freak out when your question is not being answered right away. It needs to be fitting into the story, as I'm sure you understand. If you like what you're seeing and hearing, you can download the presentation via the file download. As you can see on your screen, you can toggle full screen and go into comments through the button that you see indicated. And then, by all means, if you like what you're going to see today, which I hope you will, this video will be available on demand in about 24 hours from now, and you'll be able to share that with colleagues within your company or even those that you know outside. Please don't hold back. The more presence we have, the more we like it, obviously. The other thing I wanted to quickly mention is this material earns you CPE credits. But only if you are in this webcast live, and so not if you see this on demand. For this, type your full name and email address in the space provided. Make sure that you pay attention because you get 3 pop-ups. You got to go and hit them. If you fail one, you don't get the credit. And so that obviously implies to stay online for the entire webcast as well, please. Okay, with that, I am already happy to introduce our speakers. And I'm particularly excited about this webcast because the 2 speakers straddle connect my life between the first part and the second part. Let me start with the second part, which is as professor in innovation, leading innovation, as well as working with the conference board, where I met Bruce Wojcik. And Bruce is a very interesting guy, as I'm sure you're going to see. He has studied He has studied serial innovators for 2 decades. He's even written a book about this, which I would urge you to consider reading. Obviously, first check the webcast if you believe that is of value, but it's available, and I think you may like it. He's also a former associate dean and adjunct professor in the College of Engineering at the University of Illinois. And he currently advises mature companies of all sizes on the topic of innovation, including serving a board of 3 of those companies. The second person I'm going to introduce, and she will come and talk after Bruce, is a person who is part of my earlier life at P&G, Nancy Dawes. And Nancy is one of those serial innovators that we want to learn more about. And she spent not less than 37 years at P&G delivering major business building initiatives. She was recognized by P&G as the first female engineer inducted into the exclusive Vic Mills Society career level, in which only 15 active members at P&G reside. So it's a very elite group. So we're honored to have Nancy with us. She also has a long history of partnering with Bruce, by the way, as an interviewed subject in his book and by working together to develop and train a highly successful innovation college at P&G. With that introduction, I am sure you want to hear more about serial innovators, and I'll let Bruce take it away from here. Bruce and Nancy, thank you so much for taking the time and effort to join us today. Go for it.
Great. Thank you, John. We're really grateful to be here as well. As you said, today we're going to be talking about serial innovators, and these are people individuals who have had repeated and significant financial impact on their companies. There are really three objectives we have for today's workshop, or today's webinar. Is the first thing we want to do is complement participants' existing understanding of a process view of innovation. We don't want to replace it, we just want to complement it. And we want to do so by integrating, as you said, this people view of innovation. And as a result, we'd hopefully help you enable more breakthrough innovation in your organization. Our outline is really pretty straightforward. Since we noticed that a number of participants may not have as much experience or background in innovation, we'll spend about the first 5 or so minutes defining what we mean by breakthrough innovation, give an example or two. And then what I'll do is I'll spend a period of time describing these people, who they are, what they look like, how they work, and really what's unique about them. At that point, Nancy will take over. She'll talk about her story of innovating Olay at Procter & Gamble. And then after that, we'll return and talk collectively really a bit about how to manage them, and in a sense, how to get the most from these people. So why breakthrough innovation? Why does this interest us? If we look at the product or business life cycle, and I'll apologize to the group right now that this slide has some problems, so let me just verbalize what would appear here, and then we'll move forward. If you look at a standard S-curve model of business growth, from a concept or product being emerging to a high growth period to ultimately reaching maturity or a flattening of sales revenue, when you hit that point, you really have three options. You hit this fork in the road, and those three options are to either extend that maturity. If you're not successful doing that, you manage a decline. Or if you could, and ideally, you'd want to renew the business and start the business on a new S-curve. Extending maturity is characterized by what we refer to as incremental innovation, making small changes. It might be taking an existing product into a new market. It might be taking an existing market and slightly modifying your product or process for it. Breakthrough innovation, on the other hand, redefines the basis of competition. And again, that's a big part of what our focus will be today, that redefinition of competition. So here's an example, a quick one to contrast these two opportunities of incremental and breakthrough, and it's how do you peel carrots? And if you look at a 100+ year progression of innovation in, of all things, peeling carrots, you'll find that over 100 years ago, you had people peeling carrots with a knife, at which point safety peelers came in the 1920s and 30s. Around 1990, the ergonomic peeler emerged as a real transformation of that industry. And then shortly afterwards, pre-peeled bagged carrots, something that really rethought and reconsidered the entire premise and set of understandings about how you innovate in that industry. So if you look at this, you have a series of periods of time where the product or the process or the concept is pretty stable. And incremental innovation occurs within them. Again, you're improving the performance, you're lowering cost, but you're still maintaining the basis of competition. Between those periods of breakthrough innovation, and that's changing the basis of competition. And so really, when you look at this, companies really survive over a longer period of time by really successfully bringing a breakthrough innovation to market. If you're unsuccessful at doing this, you may last for a while, but it's only by moving to that next way of looking at innovation that you really can succeed and keep moving forward. So with that, it's just kind of a quick discussion of what we mean by these concepts. What I want to do now is talk about the people that we're interested in, the serial innovators. Beginning about, I'm going to say about 28 years ago now, when I was at the University of Illinois, I began to interact with Ray Price and then Abby Griffin, colleagues of mine there, and we collectively and individually began to observe these very rare individuals that we ultimately called serial innovators. Again, they had significant, and I'll emphasize, repeated impact on their companies. If you look at large, mature companies, they'll occur very rarely, about 1 in 1,000. In fact, earlier when John mentioned Nancy being a member of this very senior elite group at P&G, that was this very small number, a handful of people, really. They would have and do have significant multiplier financial impact compared to the already strong individuals in any organization. And as I like to say, they're the most important people you've never heard of. During the study, Abby, Ray, and I conducted about 175 in-depth interviews of about an hour each. We conducted a large sample survey, and we looked at a wide range of industries and a number of companies in many of these industries. So what you're looking at here is the result of a long-term, about a dozen-year study, plus actually subsequent work that I've done, of a large number of companies and people, and again, mature companies we're looking at here. One of the questions that I get asked regularly when I talk about this is, well, aren't these people just entrepreneurs? And in some respects, they're very similar to entrepreneurs, and in some respects, there are differences. If we compare what we've kind of jokingly referred to as the guy in the garage versus the guy in a large mature company, they both, in both of these situations, have amazing insight and amazing initiative to make things happen. So these are people who see what needs to be done, and they do it. And so independent of where they are, entrepreneurs and serial innovators are very similar. But the differences begin to emerge at this point. And I just list three. I'll talk about one or two. One is that if you're in a company like P&G, you can leverage the existing capacity and capability of that company. So if you innovate in a major way at P&G, you can leverage the marketing, the distribution, the manufacturing capability of a remarkable large company. On the other hand, if you're the guy in the garage, an entrepreneur, you may rely on your network, the VC's network. You may have to set things up. You may outsource it, but it's a different set of leverage that you have. But one of the other differences that I like to talk about is that while entrepreneurs are often glamorized, the serial innovators, again, are the most important people you've never heard of. And one that you'll hear of today is Nancy, and you'll hear from her and hear her story of how she got things done. Again, as John mentioned, arising from this study, Abby, Ray, and I published a book at Stanford University Press in 2012 called Serial Innovators. A few years later, it was translated into Japanese. And again, as I said, I've continued to work in this area, working again with mature companies of all sizes. So what makes these people stand out? What are the characteristics that repeatedly are observed in these people? First, we really ask the question how they engage in four different areas. And the first is problems. When they're confronted with a problem or a challenge, what does it look like? What do they do? These people are incredibly curious. They wonder about what's going on. They dig into it. They dig into it in ways that you would not normally think of. One person we interviewed during the study was they were interested in flowers, and what they did was they bought a nursery and they planted thousands of different kinds of flowers to learn about that. And that was just a hobby of theirs. But then in work, they would dig deeply. They're systems thinker, they're holistic thinker, they're creative. When they have a project they're working on, they're tenacious. They'll see it through in ways that other people won't. You'll see this, and actually you'll see how they engage problems and projects in Nancy's story. Tenacious to make something happen that many other people would not have had the fortitude to do. They're not people that recklessly do this, but they see the need and they work to make it happen. And if they find partway through that they're not heading in the right direction, they are able and willing to pivot and redefine and, if you will, recursively address the problem. The next that makes them so different, and this is one of the main differences, is the politics, how they navigate their organization. First, they're motivated to solve customer problems. And I'll say that these people across the board, every serial innovator that we interviewed told us that they were self-motivated to solve customer problems. And so while there are things that you can do to manage these people that we'll talk about later, the motivation comes first and foremost from them. And this is really critical difference between many of the other people in the organization. They also realize, compared to often other technical people, that the business is there to create value. And they accept responsibility to make things happen. These are people that don't just come up with an idea and throw it over the transom or expect their manager or someone else to do something with it. What they do is they take the initiative, and they do so by being willing to develop the skill and convince other people. And they develop this skill just like they've already had skills usually pre-existing in solving problems and engaging with projects. And then finally, they value people. These are not the curmudgeons that sit in the corner and wait for other people to do things or complain about other people. They value other people because those other people can help solve the customer problem. And again, it's this complete set of characteristics. Leave one out, and you're likely not going to have a serial innovator. Where do they play? This is a standard front-end, back-end model, process model of innovation. When we did our study, we found that there were people that were what we would call inventors, or more likely technical people in the front end, more likely marketing people that we refer to as champions, kind of bridging the front end and back end, and then a group of implementers. And what we observed was that the serial innovators uniquely bridged all these areas. And what they did was they played wherever was needed to solve the customer problem. So again, it was this relentless focus, this tenacity to solve the customer problems and address the customer needs. Another thing that we've observed, and I am fascinated by this personally, it's a whole other area of work for me, is how do they think, how do they know what to do today to have this future impact? And you'll see this in Nancy's stories. They look at a wide range of information that at times may be very conflicting. And they're able to reconcile these things in ways that many people aren't able to. And as they reconcile these conflicting ideas, in their mind's eye, they see a significant innovation. And if you think about it a bit, and this is a metaphor that I learned from a philosopher friend of mine, Esther Meek, is that it's a lot like looking at a child's book, a Magic Eyes book, where you see these books that have kind of the strange patterns on the surface and kind of a mass of colors and dots. And if you look at it, you just see this, oh, it's kind of interesting. But if you look at it just right in your mind's eye, either quickly or over time, you'll see this three-dimensional image in your viewing. And it's very consistent with what we heard from the innovators and how they visualize or see things. They're able to reconcile information that many other people aren't able to. And as a result, they think holistically. And then finally, the path they travel is much different than the front end and stage gate view of things. Now, I'll add that they still work within the process. This is not an either or. We're not rejecting the process. But what I'm saying is we observe that they started, and it may be difficult to read on the slide, they start in the upper left, motivated to solve problems. They spend time really finding the right problem. Now, they may be initially given a problem, a challenge, and again, Nancy's story will illustrate this. Given a problem, but then they'll move to the upper right and they'll really deeply understand this problem. Customers, suppliers, they'll understand the competitive landscape, the materials, the technology. And as they do this, sometimes they realize, we're not working on the right problem. And they will actually go back recursively and go back to find the problem, and they'll redefine the problem. In the front end and stage gate, as it's currently drawn and modeled, you don't do that. You are not recursive in your approach. You drop out. You may start over, but you drop out. Here, these people are willing and able to go backwards. And then they move into the middle area, invent and validate. Here, I just want to point out, this is where they would use small samples of products, and they would test them quickly. Serial innovators are people that were doing lean innovation before lean innovation was a concept. And so, again, they use these patterns. The path they travel is recursive. They ultimately will go through into execution as necessary to make sure the problem is solved. So again, their thinking and their process, while within a linear process, the path they travel is often very nonlinear and very recursive. And so with that as a real quick sketch, we can move to Nancy's story. I don't want to push this, Jonathan. Any questions you have that the group has?
Thank you, Bruce. Thanks for this very articulate explanation with a very nice rhythm. I thought that really came across very well. But let me stop here for just 1 second and see, does anybody have a question? I don't have any questions on my screen yet, so we're happy to go on and take them later. But I just want to give it 15 seconds more. I guess that was crystal clear. Oh, hang on, one more. We have a question. Eleni, how do you recognize these people, is the question. Will you come to that later, Bruce?
Yeah. Well, in a way that the slide where I talked about how they engage with problems, with projects, with politics, and with people, it's how you begin to recognize them before they've had this significant impact. Once you see somebody multiple times having significant impact, that really is the demonstration. So one of the things that Abby, Ray, and I asked was, how do you begin to see these patterns ahead of time? Ideally, you'd like to see them when they're students, but even when they're in the company. And you begin to see these patterns emerge that I talked about with those 4 characteristics. And I'll come back and I'll at least briefly mention them again later.
So too. Yeah. And then Victoria has a question, what are the barriers for these people? What do they encounter? Maybe that's one.
Yeah, in a large mature company, it's very often the internal politics. And again, by politics, I don't necessarily mean a bad thing. There are differing opinions that people have about what should or shouldn't move forward. And that's why it's so important for them to learn how to move the organization effectively. One of the biggest skills is to generate and develop trust and respect in the organization so that people listen to them. And it's not an easy thing to do.
Excellent. Mary and Brad also have questions, but I think these will be covered better at the part where you come back. Let us hear Nancy's story next, just to illustrate a few things and make it come to life. Nancy, pleasure. Go for it.
Thank you. Thank you. So the objective of this case study is to provide some examples of what holistic, nonlinear, and recursive looks like in real life. And I'm going to frame it using a 5-step process that I developed to teach future innovators. One is problem and problem redefinition, really the idea of scanning the environment and integrating those insights, identifying and resolving paradigms, decoding the cipher, which is really often solving the technical problems, questioning and challenging assumptions, and really importantly, doing all of these in a way that creates market acceptance. As Bruce said, one of the things that makes successful breakthrough innovation is it needs to work in the market. Let me share how this worked by sharing the story of developing the Olay total effects. When I started on this project, the problem definition was very simply create a superior anti-aging facial moisturizer. In the company I worked, there were standard tests on how to do this. You basically ran a large base consumer test versus important competitive products, and you showed that you had a significantly preferred product. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward, often difficult. What I did is looked at what was going on in the environment. So first of all, we had the Olay brand, and going back to Bruce's slide, it was a brand in decline. When Procter had bought it back in 1985, it was a 40 share. By the time I moved on to the project, it was a 17 share. There were also changes going on in the marketplace. One of the big changes was the move from kind of beauty facial moisturizers into efficacious anti-aging products. This was defined by alpha hydroxy acid, which was a material that doctors used to give chemical peels on the face, moving into a product that was sold in food, drug, mass. Now, Olay was going to be sold in food, drug, mass, basically a Walmart brand. However, women were aware both of those and of department store brands. Department store brands were seen as leading edge, expensive, and unapproachable, very expensive. Mass skincare was really seen as not leading edge, but very, very affordable and approachable. I integrated all these and really created a new problem statement, which is how do you create a superior proposition, and really thought about that as being twice the price point that you had in food, drug, mass, and really creating a very different market, which then got named as masstige. So let's go on and talk about the next step. Identifying and resolving paradigms is the hallmark of innovation, right? Every team will tell you that resolving paradigms is important. I would posit that breakthrough innovation requires you to resolve multiple paradigms. Often those paradigms interact. And again, if those paradigms can be resolved with the end in mind, it becomes even more powerful. So let me share 2 of these we needed to solve for total effects. The facial skincare market is dominated by 2 forms. There's the cream form, basically products in a jar. Women perceive those as being very efficacious, but heavy and greasy. They don't feel good. Lotions, on the other hand, are perceived as light duty, but they're very fast absorbing, so feel good. One of the ways we resolved this paradigm was this very new pump jar package. The package was short and squat, which immediately communicated the efficacy of a cream, but it also had a pump on it, which immediately communicated that it was going to absorb and feel good. Now, of course, we needed to innovate on the product inside. So we needed a product that was going to be thick, not runny, and one that would absorb into the skin. And this required development of a new thickener system that would be compatible with the chronic anti-aging actives. However, as we broke this paradigm for the consumer, we also were able to change how we launched the product. Intuitively, this very different product communicated new and different. We only launched one product instead of launching both a cream and a lotion, and that helped support the benefit that it was going to be one product that fights all 7 signs of aging. So let's go on to another paradigm that we needed to break. Chronic skin changes, the biological changes that go on, take a long time to happen, and they're typically measured in a 3-month clinical. This contrasted with women would decide whether they were going to repurchase a product in about 4 to 6 weeks. Additionally, from a market perspective, the FDA has rules on what needs to be true for a product to be a cosmetic, which means that it can only work on the surface of the skin, and you need to have claim support that talks about how it does this. So again, integrating all these, we decided that if we could deliver immediate changes to the stratum corneum, that's the top surface layer of your skin, that would complement these long-term clinically measured changes, we could solve both of these. So now we go on to the work I typically associate with technologists, decoding the cipher, right? We wanted to deliver visible results sooner. I call it every time versus a long time. We want a complementary mechanism to what the chronic is going to do. We looked at delivering more even color and tone, and we fundamentally borrowed from foundation makeup. So foundation makeup uses a combination of brown iron oxide and white titanium dioxide, right, to create the foundation makeup that women use to even their skin color. We learned that low levels of the white titanium dioxide would diffuse light and technically even in smooth skin's appearance. However, when there was white titanium dioxide in the product, it took longer for the product to rub into the skin. Women then perceived it as not absorbing. If it didn't absorb, it can't be good for my skin because skincare goes into the skin to work, whereas makeup stays on top of the skin. And makeup is bad, and particularly to all the women out there, we know that because our mothers always told us to wash off your makeup before you went to bed, and we are encouraged to use night creams. Again, the work of decoding the cipher is the usual type of work associated with innovation. I show you here one of the graphs that I pulled out, took lots of experiments to understand how to break this trade-off. I show you the consumer test, and the important one there is it shows that we technically delivered the coverage, and we did it in a way that women did not think they were sacrificing absorption, and women saw that it evened their skin's appearance. Again, lots of patents filed on this, put Procter & Gamble in a strong competitive position, but importantly, the addition of the titanium dioxide was also the basis for a lot of our cosmetic claim support. So again, solve the trade-off with the end in mind. Now, this all seems pretty easy. It's a great story, but no great story happens without the questioning, the challenging, the assumptions. So one of the givens, I've talked to you about how great this pump jar was for intuitively communicating to women what the product was going to do. However, when I came onto the project, there had just been a corporate declaration that we will add no new packages to our manufacturing menus. And the pump jar was a new package. Additionally, the accepted internal modeling showed that package does not impact consumer liking. Okay, so what did I do? First of all, picking up Bruce's piece on, right, we learn in little tests, I first proved to myself the value of a new package so that I knew it was important. And then, quite frankly, I proved and reproved many times using the internally accepted test methods that it was important. Second one is this $20 price point. One of the important things here is the accepted pre-market tests that the companies use basically predicted in-market failure. So what did I do? Lots of discussion and influencing with the senior marketing managers, and importantly showed that the database that the test was using was not going to be relevant to the price point we were doing. And basically, this is one of those areas where the accepted tests really kept us in the existing market, and I was really trying to create a new market and a new market reframe by reaching into the department store reframe. And then the consumer, again, internally there was the belief that women who bought skincare at Walmart were different than women who bought skincare in department stores. And again, I worked on that by quantifying what were the number of dual channel shoppers. Again, the other piece that we came into was integrating all this into a landmark test that really set a new standard for the company in the beauty industry, in that we showed that real women saw the benefits of Total Effects. So real women thought Total Effects was a superior product and value. And what we did here is basically used, again, our internal test, large consumer-based test, but we were very strategic about the competition. So we looked at department store brands, we looked across a range of price points that were 2 to 3 times higher than Olay Total Effects was going to be, and we looked across all the leading technologies. And the end result was women did like our product better, and they rated it higher for making more of a difference for all 7 signs of aging. So again, what we were able to do with this is basically go to market looking like a prestige department store product. So again, we have the benefit of fighting 7 signs of aging. You'll see there in the print ad, it sets up the challenge of, if you send us a partially used department store cream, we're going to replace it with Total Effects. So change the whole frame in which women viewed our product. The results were incredible. Total Effects was launched in 2000. By 2003, Olay was a $1 billion brand, and we had created this masstige category in food, drug, mass. And importantly, I say at the end, for me, one of the things I'm very proud of is 17 years later, Real Women again voted Total Effects as an iconic product. Now, let's go back, and I know there were some questions about managing serial innovators, and we're going to talk about that. But I'm just going to share a few thoughts on why managing serial innovators can be challenging. In redefining the problem, when we work recursively and go back, oftentimes to a manager, it feels like a project is going backwards. As we identify multiple paradigms that need to be solved, often it's viewed as we're complicating the project. Holistic integration. Often the serial innovator doesn't make the implicit explicit. An example I use is studying women in department store brands, right? There was a question on Olay is only going to compete in Walmart, okay, and Walgreens. Why would you want to study department store brands? To me, it seemed very obvious, and I often didn't explain what seemed obvious to other people. As we challenge givens, why are they so combative? Again, here I am coming in wanting to look at a new package, and the company has said we aren't going to do any new packages. So why are you pursuing this? And then finally, in creating market acceptance, right? When a serial innovator wants to, right, talk to a retailer, when a serial innovator wants to talk to the advertising agency or directly to the consumer, oftentimes the answer is, why do you need to get out of your box? Don't you have enough technical problems to solve on your own? So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Bruce.
Great, thanks. And I got to tell you, I've heard this story several times, and every time I hear it, I love hearing this story. To me, it's just a wonderful example of just so many things, persistence and insight.
It's so interesting you say that, because I'm sitting listening to the story and seeing the smile on your face as Nancy was talking.
Can't help it.
And you know what? I had exactly the same take on this, and it reminded me of how I've been able to go and spend 29 years of my life working on innovation, right? That whole holisticity and the paradigm challenges. Starting with the end in mind, making sure that, innovation is only successful when it produces value, right, in the end. And and then working the proposition backwards. What's your consumer proposition? What are your claims? What is your demo? What's your story? And then getting the package right, the product right, the process right. It's a fascinating piece of work, isn't it? So, indeed, very, very well told. And by the way, while you were talking, you addressed Brett's question, which is, how do you manage them? Because they are typically, different people. They're seen as the outliers in corporations. They're often seen as nuisances as well, as you already were, alluding to. I remember in my years, some of the one manager said, I would rather have no serial innovator in my organization than have one, because they're just a pain in, you know what. So managers need to learn to go and seek that conflict, right? They need to seek that different opinion. They need to seek that holisticity and that stepping back from things that sometimes temporarily slows things down, but in the end leads to much, much better results. Any further perspective on that question? Because it's so fundamental. Bruce, Nancy.
Yep.
Okay, great. Well, we'll move forward. We've got a few more slides on how to get the most of them, and we can continue discussion. One thing that I wanted to say, now after we've heard Nancy talk, is that every serial innovator is going to be different. You're going to hear different stories from different people, but this pattern that we observed in our research is going to be there in all these cases. And excuse me, without going into a lot of detail, in the upper left, it's just illustrating that Nancy was going after, if you will, the big prize, breakthrough innovation. Is there something there that is really going to have a significant financial impact on the company and serve customer needs? If you look at the upper right and you see those 4 areas of what they engage, I could go back to probably spend another 10 minutes just reciting how it ties together. But here we're talking about managing these people and how they navigate politics. I'd say you see someone who is able to deliver on something that. Let's just say politics isn't, usually for most engineers and scientists, their first expertise. I jokingly have told people that you can tell whether an engineer is an extrovert because they're looking at your shoes, not their own. And so for many engineers, sorry, I didn't mean that for you, but but the point is that for many people, this is just not comfortable, but yet they do it. The lower left, Nancy talked about resolving these paradigms, these differences, again, that holistic thinking, the connecting the dots, the collecting and connecting the dots, and finally the path, the recursive and nonlinear path in the lower right. And so really, again, I know I'm repeating this, but I want to really re-emphasize these areas because the pattern is there. In fact, one person I spoke to at one point said about their company, we knew we had people like this, we just didn't know other companies did. And that was a not dissimilar thing. And another thing I've heard at times when I talk to people, someone will come up to me and they'll say, oh, we got a guy like that or a woman like that, and their name is this. They will particularly mention that person's name, which to me is significant because it really indicates that this is a people view of how things happen. So again, how do you get the most of them? I want to be very clear. We are not pitting process against people in a competitive way. It's a both and. They work within the process. I want to point out too, when you want to develop these people, early in their career, assign a challenging problem, not necessarily even an easy one. Get them engaged with customers. Nancy talked earlier about, people questioning why did she want to talk to the people in advertising, the ad agencies, and then encourage them and guide them in selling their ideas internally. These are some of the biggest ways that we've observed in our research. I should add, too, that our research not only was looking at the innovators, and again, I should tell you that we asked them to describe their problem and project, not to give their opinion. So we really got, firsthand data from them. But we also conducted studies on the managers of the innovators, the HR managers. So we really triangulated them. So this information that I'm sharing now comes from that manager study. How do you retain them and get the most from them? You don't micromanage them. You engage and guide them. You unleash but not drive them. One of the people we spoke to talked about letting the birds fly. And I think it's a marvelous description. If they're already motivated to solve customer problems, be there with them and for them, but let them loose. This requires a very individualized and relational form of management. And it's not the kind of management you can give to everybody. And that really is okay. You don't need to give everybody the same, if you will, care and feeding. And then it requires patience. Nancy talked about sometimes going forward, looks like it's going backwards. You need to be patient with time and resources. And this is a phrase that Ray Price came up with. I love it. You have to accept uncertainty and yet at the same time expect serendipity. And we're not wired to think that way, especially when we're thinking about a process. So I don't want to pan a process. I just want to say, how do you bring the process to life in people like this? So, in summary, we want to just emphasize that breakthrough innovation is critical for survival of your company. We say that serial innovators are real but rare people with special skills and perspectives. And they're key contributors to your companies, and I should add and emphasize long-term financial success. And then managing these people requires special skill. They're not the curmudgeon in the corner that withdraws, they're the people that are making things happen. So that's kind of a nutshell. I'll end with that it's a lot easier and a lot cleaner to ignore these people, but it's deadly to do so. So our question to the participants is, what will you do about it? It's kind of a challenge to the audience. So with that, John, any other questions from you or participants or whatever? Go for it.
We have 15 minutes left, so that's very well timed and delivered. It allows me to go back to Mary Easterling's earlier question, who asked, and you've answered it to some degree, but let me check if you answered it for Mary to satisfaction. Did the research show you that serial innovators can be developed? And you've given your recommendations. I would also say, by the way, one thought that came to mind when I heard you talk. I'll give Mary some time to react to see if her answer her question was answered or no. But the one thing that really strikes me is, how often do leaders have this kind of conversation? And do we ever talk about these kind of things in most corporations? If anybody has any thought on that, please shoot on your feed here. I would seriously doubt that. So that was Mary's question. Let me see, Mary, did you answer it? No, you left it. So if there's any more, please put in. Rita, sure, great of you to have joined us as well. Let me put up this question that you asked, Rita. How many serial innovators, which is interesting, are not technical in your research? Are serial innovators always technical or no?
Yeah, it's a very good question, John. The research that Abby and Ray and I conducted focused on companies that were at least enabled by technology or technical expertise. And so, and also at the time, Ray and I were in the engineering college, so our network included a large number of engineers. We didn't, for example, look at people that were like in the design thinking area, and I'm not trying to, say anything negative about them. It's just that our sample didn't cover that. So, it's not that every company was, for example, an Intel, because we had companies that were, making heavy machinery, like we said. But it was just typically that way. I think of our sample, I think we had one person that did not have a technical background that ultimately was identified as a serial innovator. But that's, I'd say, more a function of the companies that we selected on rather than who these people are.
But okay,
companies made mistakes.
Great, that's good perspective from your research. When I'm thinking a bit more about the question, I hear your answer. I would also say, if you go back to your principles of how they engage, your problems, projects, politics, and people, that can apply to any leader or any
Yes.
any innovator, right? So I think the principles that you list, they would count across disciplines. What do you think?
Well, and if I can jump in too, on the drive in this morning as we were talking, it can apply to either to genders really. It's not a male thing or a female thing. In fact, colleagues in Japan had actually observed people like this in Japan, and it's not necessarily even a cultural thing. It's people who are able to make things happen. So there's breadth there, is what I'm saying.
Okay, I hope that answers your question, Rita. Anita Hoffman says, how do you avoid that they leave your organization as the mainstream people get promoted? Sorry, as the mainstream people get promoted, of course. But they're often sidelined, or they're seen as the oddballs. You see, you get the question?
Yeah, well,
please.
Again, very good question. One of the things that Procter & Gamble did 25 years ago was set up a technical career ladder. So I think there are organizationally things companies can do. Now that's a pretty big change, big commitment, right, for a big company. The second piece I would say is giving them enough recognition inside your company that makes the work that they do aspirational for younger people who are coming behind them. Oftentimes, when these serial innovators are hidden, it's perceived that they aren't valued. And I think there are things that can be done even without changing the organization inside a company that make sure that what they do is made more visible and aspirational.
Very well said. I had a similar thought to that question. It also comes back earlier on to my point earlier on, which is have the conversation about this subject in your corporations as a starting point. Then go how you develop, how you identify those individuals, how you develop those individuals, and how do you reward those individuals. And that requires a program, which indeed in P&G, remember, it's taken us years to get this right.
Mm-hmm.
So
John, one other piece that I would build on that is I call it takes one to know one. And so often if you can get, right, your serial innovator or innovators, right, involved in who do they see, and then back to the question about how do you develop them, if you think about very choicefully who your serial innovators are seeing kind of as, versions of themselves, how do you set them up in mentoring relationships? So again, there are some things that happen serendipitously, and then there are some things that you can actually, right, try to help organize and orchestrate.
I think that's a nice build. I would also say serendipity is like, some people call it luck, right? I always say I don't believe in luck. I believe luck is when preparation meets opportunity. So I think you can still influence that serendipitous side, if you want, of your argument as well. Very well said. I want to move on to Luca Rossi, who's I think taking us to the next level with this question. Thanks for joining us, Luca, by the way. How do you protect them from the corporation? What about a team spin-off outsourced to make the process leaner? How do you leverage it? How do you protect them and then leverage them?
Yeah, I'll make just a couple of comments, and Nancy may have more to suggest. There are different ways to organize things, and I'm kind of the general opinion that with the right people, you can organize things any way you want to. But I will say that there's significant value to have these people embedded in the organization. And I say that because that way they see the existing customer needs, they firsthand grasp the capabilities, the skill sets, the manufacturing, the development. They grasp the existing and they use that as part of their thinking to leverage it. So while it's not required, the minute you make that into something outside and other, they become more like an entrepreneur, and not that it's necessarily bad, but they lose a lot of the potential benefit from an organization. And it's not always that clear what that benefit is until you start realizing what you don't have. It also disciplines them too. I'm a big fan of what I refer to as the discipline of the marketplace. If you get too detached from the marketplace, you can have fun and do whatever you want, but it's not the same as having to deliver on something. So you want to protect them. And I'll end with this thought, is that I like to say that the barrier to commercialization should be no higher, nor lower than the marketplace itself. If you make it too difficult in the organization, especially for the wrong reasons, it's a problem. But also, if you make it too easy to launch something, you're going to waste a lot of time and money too. So the question is, how do you go about doing that? And it takes discernment at all levels, both technical side and from the management and executive side, to know what that looks like.
I find that very interesting, that answer that you just provide in terms of making sure that you benefit from them also within the mainstream operation, that you don't make them entrepreneurs. This is probably subject for a later follow-up webcast. In an environment where many corporations right now are separating off their breakthrough innovation efforts from their mainstream effort. And so I'm not sure how to think about that yet. Interesting. If anybody has any comment, please throw it in the feed. In the meantime, I want to go to Joachim von Heimburg, and I could talk to Joachim. Thanks for joining us. On managing serial innovators, I think there are two types of managers: the ones who thrive on acquiring and using power, and the ones who enjoy solving relevant problems. The latter have normally no problems with serial innovators. What's your advice to innovators how to handle the former? The ones driven by ego, I guess. That's a good one.
Well,
as well.
Since this is being recorded, I guess I shouldn't say that they should update the resume. And I'm teasing by saying that. But you do, it's a matter of selling. And I think the first order is, how do you sell your ideas to that manager? And if you can't do that, are there others that you can engage to help influence that manager? And if it's really a persistent problem, there is a question of, do you walk? I don't mean update your resume, necessarily leave the company, but do you find another part of the organization that will better use your skill set? Now, I don't want to suggest people jump to that too quickly, but it really is a matter of how significant is the problem from my perspective. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, to me, it would be trying to understand as a thrive on power, sort of what that means. And then it becomes, is there a way that if power is being successful, that I can be clear to them that I'm trying to make them successful, right? Because in the end, I typically find if you get, a good breakthrough innovation that's successful in the marketplace, there is oftentimes, room for everybody to get credit for that. But it does take,
no, you're right.
It makes, as a serial innovator, it's like with any employee, you do better in an environment, if you know that you're being, encouraged and nurtured and supported and challenged versus, you're set up in an adversarial relationship. It's just where your energy goes.
And I'll quickly add, when I heard and think of power, I think of control, and that may not be the right. So I appreciate Nancy's comment there too, that you want to find alignment if you can get it.
I do want to reinforce that this is always a field of friction, and it's very hard for many managers. And again, as we all know, or those P&Gers, ex-P&Gers know, several actually are on the line. It took us many years to get it right, as I said earlier on, which included, training the management partner and training the manager one up with the responsibility for that combo of, technical career ladder, innovation career ladder versus managerial ladder. So it does take effort and intentionality, I guess, is that a very popular word these days. Okay, Kelsey, this question I've been looking at for some time. I find that also to be to be an interesting one. And Nancy, I think you can speak to this in particular. Are they individual contributors, or would their career ladder include managing people as their career develops? What's your experience on this?
So again, a very interesting thing that certainly at P&G there was a lot of back and forth on. Oftentimes with a serial innovator, right, you may not want their time spent doing all of the, I call it managerial paperwork. However, putting them in the roles where they can, right, coach, develop, train, have input into what the younger innovators are doing is very important. I would say, depending on the company and the company structure, right, there's probably different ways of doing it. Right, certainly there are many serial innovators who are really good managers, and then there are certain serial innovators who won't be good people managers. So again, I think this discernment of, right, their management structure and how do you best utilize them, and not having a one-size-fits-all. Again, I go back to Bruce's piece where, right, they looked at all of these serial innovators. There's very similar patterns, but if you go into any one of their stories, they did it differently because of the company they were in, because of the business they were in, because of the people who were around.
I want to thank you, Nancy. I think that's very precise, spot on. I want to finish off this. Thank you, by the way, excellent questions, all of you. Thanks so much for engaging to this level of depth. I've really enjoyed this and appreciated this myself. I want to finish off with Brad's question. Brad Barbera, who's asking a very nice one as well to finish us off. Do serial innovators know they are serial innovators? If I think I'm a serial innovator, how do I know it's true versus just an inflated ego? Brilliant question.
That's a great question. In a nutshell, I think you look at the outcome. What kind of repeated significant financial impact have they had? And if they've had that, and again, it'll vary with the size of the company, but if they've had that kind of impact, I'd say the answer is yes. I will say that when we did our large sample survey, we saw an estimate that like 1 in 500 in a very large company was a serial innovator. But when we asked the people who responded whether they were, we had a 1 in 5 response that they were. Now maybe that was the truth, but I think that it's a good question, because very often people think they are when they have not ultimately contributed that way. And so it's really, show me what you've done.
Yeah, and I would say, right, great. If you're on the path and you think you're doing it, keep doing it. Yeah. Right? So it's this constant looking at what is it that, right, Bruce looked at this list on what these serial innovators were doing, and even, right, when I started working with him after he published the book, I was looking at those and saying, okay, well, there's other ones out there. What can I learn from them? What skills can I begin to develop? What were some of the things these innovators did, or their characteristics, that I can incorporate into, right, who I am to continue to make me better? So my other one is, I would say often the problem is a serial innovator, a young one, doesn't necessarily know that's what they are. And that's the other side where I would say, as mentors, right, how do you help as a manager, right, talk to the person about what this is and what you're seeing, right? If you have another innovator in the company, right, are they seeing what you're doing and coaching you to become even better?
Thank you, Nancy. I would also add, maybe summarize this conversation and saying, help we as more, look at the gray hair, more senior leaders, or older leaders at least, help our people to become self-aware, and then take on humility and confidence and focus on making a difference. Maybe that's an interesting way to go and close this call. Thank you, Bruce and Nancy. This was amazing. I really enjoyed it. Please, those on the line, first of all, thank you for joining us and enjoying the presentation. Please give us the feedback. I hope and be critical so we can learn and improve on as we move forward. and engage with us into the future. You can look at our website, Innovation and Digital Transformation website of the Conference Board. We'll be doing more webcasts. We're looking at publications that are coming your way. Join the innovation councils that exist to meet with your peers on the subject of innovation leadership, both in Europe and in the US. And we hope to stay close to you. And I'm glad you like the webcast, Laura Fraval, already. Thank you so much. Thanks again, Bruce and Nancy, and I hope to see you soon in our next edition of this webcast series of Innovation Digital Transformation by the Conference Board. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John.